proceed. We have about 20 minutes or so in terms of what's left. But as we were discussing, we're kind of thinking about, some of the requirements: shadowing, research, mentorship, taking a gap year. And I think, Simo, you had a few remarks remaining, and then we're going to go to Clyde and maybe Taita, Fadzwa, and George can chime in as needed.
Well, I was just going to say, you can try cold emailing people. Sometimes it works. Leverage your network. In terms of shadowing, I only had 12 hours of shadowing, but I spent a year volunteering at a clinical center. So I think that counts for clinical experience. And what else? Research. I did research in undergrad. I did research professionally. So I don't think, I don't know if I can speak to research because it's something that I've done quite a bit. And I think that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I will just echo what Simo has said. I think the baseline that you would want to think about is your MCAT score, your GPA and shadowing, because I think the MCAT and the GPA, those are kind of like the things that they will use to filter just in the beginning. And so you want to make sure that you get a score that allows you to get your foot in the door. And then shadowing is a good thing because it gives you an idea of how the process, like how the clinic system works, even in the US. Because I do understand, like I was in Zimbabwe, I didn't really know much about hospitals here in the US. And so that was a good opportunity for me to see how things work, how you interact with doctors, and just get an idea of like how it would look like to be a doctor in the US. And then with research, there's like, most of the academic schools, they're really big on research. And so if you're really considering applying to schools like Stanford, Harvard, those schools are big on research. So you may want to have some research under your belt because I think it also kind of opens up those doors. But then you also want to do things that you really, really like, because I know like we talk in general about volunteering, about like doing community service. But if it doesn't speak to you, don't feel compelled to do that. I know George mentioned that he applied for the Davis Peace Projects. I also did a similar thing. So it's like follow your passions and like do things that will make you someone who like stands out because that's just who you are, but not necessarily because you're trying to check boxes. But you have to make sure that you have the baseline, which is GPA, MCAT, shadowing, and then research is a good thing if you are considering applying to like the big academic institutions.
Yeah, so I guess the only other thing that I can add in terms of those particular requirements, I guess it's been a while for me, but either way, the clinical experience was a requirement, and the research thing was something that I had to like look into. Also, being like in a smallish college, with no like major institution, like no medical school attached to it, we had to sort of like look outside the box, just try to understand like what opportunities were available in the community itself. And also what I also did was that when I got a chance to go back home to Zimbabwe, be it for like a week or two, I was still also involved in, I mean, thanks to my mom, I would let her know so that she would at least connect me with some of the doctors that are in Zim, and be it local doctors in Zimbabwe or US trained physicians who are back and now working in Zimbabwe. So like you have that sort of like connection and you get a sense of what the difference is. And that is also something that even during my interviews, everyone was very keen to hear, like when you could really talk about that, to say like, hey, I've had this experience. I've like actually shadowed a US trained physician who's now operating and working in this environment, and just to get a sense of like how that contrasts. So like you try to utilize whatever opportunities that you have. And that was one of them that was very helpful for me.
I don't know, as someone who's more on a professor attending level, do you have any input, Tari?
I think everyone touched on the key points. So definitely making sure you have good grades, like the MCAT is really going to be important. Again, I say this again as someone who had to retake the MCAT, give yourself enough time to study for the MCAT. And I think just doing maybe just one research, I think that really, because I've been also on the admissions committee, like that really just really adds a lot to your application. clinical part, I think Tampu just posted something on the chat. There is a website that can help you in terms of linking you up in terms of like clinical opportunities. And I would say for you guys, you're also at an advantage that there are now like a lot of physicians out there, like so people like Tambu, George, and I, you can always reach out to us, and then we could always try to like connect you with people at your place. Like once you're in medicine, it becomes a small field. So it might be we would be able to find like someone that we could connect with, connect you to for shadowing opportunities.
Okay. So I mean, I kind of just to comment on this issue of shadowing and opportunities and research. I was more interested in research when I applied, and so I was not interested in basically going to someone's clinic and shadowing. But one thing I will mention is I got my shadowing experience by basically emailing a hospital's volunteer department. So you don't have to necessarily shadow an actual physician. You just have to have some kind of clinical background. So I did it in two ways. So hospitals have volunteers. You basically go 1 or 2 hours a week into the hospital and you help out. You get patients food, whatever they need when they call the call bell, things like that. It helps you kind of get a sense of what it means to be in the hospital. The other thing is you can kind of kill two birds with one stone. So I actually signed up for a clinical research project where I actually had to interview people in the emergency department. So I wrote that as a shadowing experience because I was actually working in the ER, but I also wrote it as a clinical shadowing experience because, as I said, I was working in the ER, right? I was doing research and working in the ER. So it doesn't have to be a very straightforward thing. We also had other programs at my school where people signed up to be EMS or junior EMT programs. So you can be unconventional about how you go about things. And as Tafadzo mentioned, the opportunities don't necessarily have to be in the US. They can be international experiences. You can go to Zimbabwe for a holiday and then shadow a doctor there who's going to write you a great recommendation letter. I did some research in Tanzania where I was working with the clinic, and basically that was clinical experience. So you don't have to limit yourself to the US for some of these experiences as well. The one thing I will bring up is, given the difficulty in terms of the process, has anyone encountered any stumbling blocks, i.e., this can be for our panelists or it can be for people in the group who are already on the path, but rejections, how did you deal with that? Any other blocks, financial blocks, for example, how did you handle those? So, I will kind of leave it open, and anyone who wants to chime in terms of navigating some of these unexpected events through the process can give their input. No one?
I can start us off. I think Dr. Tariro spoke about this. I think the MCAT is a big deal. And that's something that you should start to think about early on when you're still in college. And even like after if you don't do it when you're still in college, you have to really make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to prepare for it. I had to take it 2 times as well. So it's a very intense exam. You have to do it like almost like 7 hours of you just sitting down, going through questions. So you have to build stamina, and it's not something that you can do in 3 weeks. So you kind of like have to make sure that you know how best to learn, like you know what it is, like you're preparing yourself. And then with that, it's an expensive exam as well. So you need to have enough resources because the whole key is like to do a lot of questions. And most of those questions, you have to pay for it. So you have to plan for it like financially as well, just in terms of time management. I took a gap year, 3 gap years actually. And so I was taking my MCAT while I was working. And so it was kind of like a lot of hassling. Like I didn't afford not to go to work because I needed to have enough money for like the preparation process. So that's just something to keep in mind, that you're kind of balancing the time as well as the money that you need for the process.
And I think just to add on that, I think Paddington asked a question on like how to maximize be effective in medical school. So that's one thing I didn't realize. So once you get into medical school, like it's still a marathon, like so you'll still continue having some of the standardized exams. So to Paddington, like give yourself enough time to study for the step 1 and step 2, because that's really going to determine what kind of residence you end up applying into, and you still need to continue doing research. And then also, if you find a field that you want to go into, shadow those people, do research with those people. So that's going to be an ongoing process with medicine. Like you have to, the exams, they never end. They eventually end at some point, but you need to be studying for those exams, the steps. Then once you're in residence, you'll be taking in-service exams. And then also once you finish your residence, you also have to take board certifying exams. So giving yourself enough time to study for those, especially in medical school, that really determines, it's not like an absolute thing, but it helps in terms of choosing which specialty you end up wanting to go into.
Yeah, so speaking of the standardized exam, so just to clarify for everyone on the call, so kind of a progression of the exam. So your MCAT is basically the standardized medical school admissions exam. It's a different format now. I think it's out of 520 something, some weird number. And schools use that as a gateway, but some schools really emphasize your entire application. The next standardized exam you will have to take if you do go to med school is what's called the USMLE, which is the United States Medical Licensing Exam. It has 3 steps, step 1, 2, and 3. Step 1, you take at the beginning, sometime in first or second year of med school. It's now pass-fail, meaning you get a score, but it basically says you've passed or you've failed. In the past, they used to use residences, use this score as a gateway to see if they would give you an interview, but now they've shifted more to step 2 because step 1 is pass-fail. So step 2 is the next one, which is highly clinical. Step 1 is highly basic science and a little bit more physiology and clinical stuff. Step 2 is very clinical. Step 2 is, and step 1 is about a 9-hour exam, I think 8 to 9-hour exam. Step 2 is a 2-day exam. It's clinical, and again, you get a score. And then you write step 3 once you're in residency, or at least at the end of med school, depending on how ambitious you are. Step 3 is basically the final licensing exam that says you can actually be a fully licensed practitioner in the United States. In terms of the in-service exams that Tari was talking about, they can be standardized tests depending on your specialty. Some specialties have them, some don't. I was in general surgery and we had to take a yearly in-service standardized test. And that is basically designed to prepare you for your final board certification exam. It also helps you in terms of applying to fellowship, because the better you do in your in-service tests, the more the fellowships will look favorably upon you depending on what you do. So Tari was OBGYN, she did in-service exams. Some specialties don't have in-service exams every year. They only have the board certification exam. The final exam you probably have to take is the board certification, and each specialty is a governing body that basically says you are a safe practitioner and you're now allowed to go into the world and practice. You don't have to take board certifying exams, but if you end up in a litigious situation and you are not board certified, it can come back to bite you. So most people end up being board certified. And if you are planning on going back to Zimbabwe, you have to be board certified, because the Zimbabwe board will say you are not approved as a board certified physician in the US. So they don't recognize your specialty. So you have to be board certified if you ever think of actually licensing as a specialist in Zimbabwe. So I took my general surgery boards, which comprised of a standardized exam and an oral exam. Different specialties have different exams. And then if you specialize, that's a whole different discussion. Some specialties like cardiology have their own exams as well, because that's another exam, but we won't go into that. There were a couple of other questions in the chat. One of them was about shadowing. In terms of what the value is ascribed to shadowing in Zimbabwe versus shadowing in the US. Do you guys think it matters whether you shadow in Zimbabwe or whether you shadow in the US? Maybe, did anyone shadow in Zimbabwe or the US? Or you guys all did your shadowing in the US?
I
I
did.
think
I'm sorry.
I was just saying we've been
George can take this one, yeah.
Who's taking this?
George, and then Tafadzo can chime in.
I think. Yeah, so I was saying, for me, I had a couple of international shadowing experiences, both outside of Zimbabwe, but still international. So my approach was I actually found those to be more useful during my application cycle. But for safety, I still had some shadowing experiences in the US as well. As my approach was like, at least be like everyone and do the extras. So I found both to be useful. And one little word that I would add is sometimes it's hard to find these opportunities, but you can just like flat out email people. I'm pretty sure every community, they have doctors there. So you can find them like, hey, I'm a pre-med student. I'm interested in medicine. Can I shadow you? And more often than not, people are very helpful. So don't be shy, just try it out.
Tafaza, you said you shadowed in Zimbabwe and volunteered in the US. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So we had a volunteer, I guess similar to what you had done. I also emailed around while I was in college. There was a volunteer program that was run by a service in some hospitals near the college where I was at. And we would just go, like, give people blankets and patients blankets, bring them food, help turn the beds around, transport patients here and there. So that was just like the volunteer aspect of it, which I did in the US. And then in Zimbabwe, I actually was able to work with several doctors, Dr. Maraire and Dr. Chura, both US trained physicians who relocated back home, and got to see sort of like what I shadowed them in clinic as well as in the OR. And in addition to that, we were able to also see some of the clinic settings that we had with just some of the local doctors in some of this one of these like Catholic hospitals. I forgot exactly where that was, but that was arranged through like Maimano, and we're like sort of like the guinea pigs of this of this program that was starting. And so that was my experience in Zimbabwe, like working with both, like I mentioned, like US trained physicians as well as just like Zim trained, and working in the hospitals, like be it like the rural hospitals as well as the city hospital. So I got to see a little bit of both those settings. And that was the extent of my clinical exposure that I put on my application, actually.
Yeah. So for me,
George, can I just pipe in that we still have the pre-med shadowing program? We've actually developed it more, and it happens for undergraduates. It's not just for USAP students. Any Zimbabwean who wants to come home and spend a summer shadowing. We've about 5 physicians here who studied in the US, and they are in different disciplines, and they are the ones we use for physician shadowing. But it's open every June and July. The application process comes out in January.
Is that through the Career Connect?
ZCC. Yeah, it's called the Zimbabwe Career Connect program, and physician shadowing is one of the options. We have 20 people coming home this summer in general for internships, and 3 of them are physician shadowing.
So shadowing internationally can actually give you a bit of an edge, because it gives you a unique story, and you actually stand out from a lot of the applicants who just basically shadow their father's friend who's a family practitioner in their local hometown. So, don't disregard those experiences as less than. Actually, they can actually make you stand out a little bit more with a lot of these schools, because there are huge drives for global health, global surgery, for diversity and things like that. So people are really trying to recruit people with more diverse and unique stories in med school than they are just kind of the, cookie cutter students. Personally, people who know me know I like maximizing efficiency. So I actually killed 3 birds with 1 stone during one summer. So I basically signed up to do my senior thesis on like soil transmitted helminths, which ended up with me working at a rural clinic in Tanzania, which made me able to shadow people at that clinic. So basically I killed research, thesis, and shadowing at the same time. So I know time is of essence for other people, because we can't all take gap years. We can't all basically dedicate time to shadow and things like that. So, leveraging, I leveraged my mentor, my thesis mentor, and he basically found me an opportunity where I could do all 3. So you should leverage your PIs, your mentors, your academic advisors, your resources at school, and other networks and people at home. We're running a bit short on time, and I was thinking maybe we could run a few minutes late until maybe 4:15 if people are willing to stick around, since we had that incident. But for those people who are not able to stick around, I just wanted to address one thing in terms of, I just wanted to give our panelists kind of a moment to say, what do you think was fundamental in you getting into med school, in terms of what would you advise people in terms of for the people who went into med school, getting into med school, for the people who are in residency, key steps from med school to residency, and for Tariro, key steps from med school, residency, getting into fellowship, and even practicing as an attending, and getting positions as an assistant professor and attending. Any piece of advice? So we'll kind of start with our fresh med students, so Clarity, followed by Simo.
I would say for me, the biggest thing was research, because I did 3 years of research, and I did research all 4 years of college. So I think if I were to pick one thing, that's probably it. But I also had like a varied extracurricular activities. But I think the biggest thing was my research.
Okay.
I would also say research, because I did 2 years of research in college and then 3 years of research after college. But also I think just stay the course and believe that it will eventually happen, because for me it took a long time and sometimes you can be really discouraged. So just do your best and stay the course and it will happen.
Maybe George and then Tafazo.
So I would say the biggest thing for me was people, knowing people and having the people who are willing to support you, who believe in you, who believe sometimes in a vision more than you. And I had a mentor who really believed in me, who made sure that she almost made it a purpose that I get into medical school. So that was big for me. And I would say also just saying it and putting it out there that I want to do medicine. You have a lot of people who doubt you, but you also have a lot of people who support you. So just say it out there and you'll find people to support you.
Yeah, so I guess more or less the same as what George was saying, like having the people around you who you can also lean on, that you can always go to them whenever you have situations. Like I would just, I guess, talk about the transition from like med school into residency, knowing that, because that's one of the main things that once you're in, that you have to decide on is what are you going to commit the rest of your life to doing right after medical school, because it's sort of like one moment you're just learning about everything, and then once you're done, you're just going to be focused on one particular thing. And knowing how people have approached that, understanding like these are the factors that you look into and how you want to operate and how you want to live your life. And I also think it's very important once you're in it to just know and understand the things that don't speak to you. If you feel like, for example, initially I went in thinking I would do neurology. But once I did clinical neurology, like it didn't, at the end of the day, it wasn't like I didn't look forward to going back to going onto those wards the same way that I did when I was like on the cardiology floor, for example, even like on the nephrology floors, so there's just some of those things, those minor things, to realize that even if you have a whole different and reinvention of things, it's sometimes can be also for the best, and having someone to talk to about that as well, who's been through it, is always very helpful.
Okay, maybe Tariq can chime in.
I think the biggest thing for me was I think I mentioned this, finding your people. Like my mentors were the biggest thing. And you don't necessarily have to have one mentor. Like you can have many. Like I had a mentor for like research, for like my global health things. And so just finding those right people. Like from college, I found someone who I did research with, and then we also did some international projects together. Same thing in med school, and even in residence. I decided 2 or 3 months before the deadline for fellowship that I wanted to apply into fellowship. And because I'd connected myself with the right people, we quickly came up with an application, and one of my mentors reached out to one of the programs that I wanted to go to, and that's how I was able to go to that place. Same thing when it comes to looking for jobs, just keeping your network. That's how you end up finding jobs. Finding the people like your village, I think, people that will end up supporting you. And I think for me also having the right people supporting me, like my husband, George, and also I'm a very spiritual person. Like I always tend to God for most of the things. So those were some of the key things for me.
Tambi is a lot to say, so I'll give Tambi
George, can
1 or 2 minutes to chime in.
George, can I jump in really quickly? There's a piece that we've left out where we had a lot of questions.
Yeah, the financial. I was gonna go back to that, but I figured some people have places to be, so I just wanted to give them, some of the panelists have places to be, so I just wanted to give them like time to wrap up so that they can go, and then whoever wants to stay on the meeting can stay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Tambu, if you want to give like 1 or 2 words of input, and then what we're going to do is after Tambu speaks, whoever needs to go can log off and go. The meeting is being recorded, and I put my email and like I have a little hobby website because I've a lot of time on my hands where I'm going to post the video once we edit out the nonsense. And then I'm going to put some other resources that we shared. If people want to share resources with me as well, I'll put all of those there. And then we can basically kind of all share and keep things in a central spot. And then we can talk about finances with the people who stay on the meeting. And I think finances is a big thing. Right, Tambo?
Yeah, I've been trying to answer some questions in the chat. So if you need to leave, you can quickly read that. But also I agree with finding your support. It's very important. Like Tari and George, like they were, we're same class, but they helped me. Even now, I'm still talking to them about career things. So I think that's like really the most important thing, because sometimes you may just miss out things if you think you can find things on the internet. So use those people.
All right, so kind of, so if any of the panelists need to log off and go, or any of the attendants need to go, feel free to go. As I said, the link to the video, I put the website where I'll be posting it. And then my email is also in the chat. If anyone wants to email me and get more information on a lot of these things, feel free to email me. I'm maybe a little bit slow with responding, but I will respond. So, the elephant in the room. Let's start with the people that have gone through the process. How did you guys finance applications, MCATs, all those things? Because they're expensive, we know that. Once Clarity and Simo chime in on how they finance the application, we can talk about financial aid. How did people finance their medical school education? And then Tafadzwa and Tari can chime in terms of how did you finance residency applications, because those are way more expensive too, because you have to go for residency interviews, you have to go for all these things. So let's start with Simo, and then we can go to Clarity about financing applications and how to get financial aid for med school.
So for the applications, I was working, so I was able to pay for my applications, but also ask for waivers. So I think now they changed. So like international students have access to a program that helps students with the application. I forget the name, but I can look it up and send to Fari and he can share. But when I applied, we didn't have access to that. So what I did is every time I got an invitation to fill out a secondary application, I will write to the adcoms and ask for a waiver. And I was able to save $900 just asking for waivers. And then what else? Also for medical school, I wrote to admissions asking for scholarships. Emory is not very good with international students and financial aid. So I wrote to admissions, I wrote to doctors at Emory, and I ended up just talking to current students. Actually, there's a Zimbabwean student at Emory who helped me and just showed me how she did it. So eventually, I ended up getting a health professions loan from Discover with the U.S. citizen co-signer, and I've written a blog about the external scholarships that international students can look for, but those will not cover the whole cost of attendance, but they can help you, $7,000 here, $2,000 there, and it adds up in a way.
Yeah, I also used Simo's template. She actually emailed me the email that she used to ask for waivers. So I also used that in my applications. I think saving ahead of time is very helpful, at least it was for me. Because you just want to plan ahead and make sure that you have enough money, because some of the schools will not give you the waivers. But with the fee assistance program, I think that will probably not be an issue. Then in terms of securing funding, I will say that there's a couple of schools where you can get financial aid that will cover everything. And so that's also something that you have to keep in mind when you're applying, that like the schools that do that tend to be the competitive schools. And so money is an issue. So you want to make sure that you also be able to kind of like be prepared for that. And then my program is tuition free. And I think NYU as well, Columbia probably just started. So my program is like the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine. It takes 32 students every year and it's tuition free. They also have a set of scholarships that they give to 5 students, and those will cover your living expenses. So like there's like you can essentially just go to med school for free with that program. And I think that's also true. Stanford has a really good financial aid program where they cover, like they match your financial needs. And so if you really like do your research and like look into all those schools, and then just make sure that like when you're applying, you keep that in mind so that you have numbers that can get you access to those schools, because the Cleveland Clinic program probably interviews like 2,000 students and takes 32. So that's just something to keep in mind, that all the schools that are tuition free are going to be like as competitive. So you have to start ahead of time for your application so that you have enough scores and like the statistics that you need to get through for those ones.
So I just wanted to mention that one of the resources we will be compiling and sharing is kind of a list of schools that do accept internationals and schools, and in kind of a framework in terms of how their financial aid works. So we'll compile something that we'll have a link to, and people can kind of peruse that as well. But I would say do your due diligence, ask for some money, talk to people like Zimbabweans at that school, see how they did it, because some schools need co-signers, some don't, but there are ways to navigate this process. And sometimes asking for the scholarship will get you the scholarship. Anyway, we'll have George's MD PhD, and MD PhD is a little bit different, but I'll have you chime in terms of funding for that, and then maybe Tafazo and then Tari.
Yeah, so I did the MD PhD program partly because of my interest in research, but also the finances did play a huge part, because I knew that I don't have to worry about the funding. So that kind of helped me for both the MD and the PhD part. But I would say for my school, what I've seen to work is there are some resources that they don't even put online, maybe because they don't want to be flooded with the questions. So you only learn about them when you come. You're like, wow, I didn't know you guys have this. So I would say talking to the students who are there and just getting all the intel that you can, they might know things that might not even be public.
Yeah, Tafazo.
Yeah, definitely. Basically echoing what George had mentioned. I know other programs, for example, like Georgetown. Sometimes I didn't go to Georgetown, but Georgetown has a scholarship program that they offer international students. But this is sort of like a university application. But most of the international students who have gone through the medical school and applied for it have gotten it. So it sort of like covers all that tuition, but you never know about it because it's not a part of the actual medical school funding. It's more like a university fund and university scholarship. So sort of like having, if you see anyone who's been there, always a plus to ask about that. And in terms of like, once you're in saving money, I mean, once you're in residency, you do get a little pocket change here and there, and you really have to be very, very, very frugal. I did my residency in New York, and it really feels like there's like, there's an animal in your bank just chowing at your money at any moment. So you really have to be very, very diligent about that and looking at, and then sort of like scheduling exams and board reviews and all that, and just sort of like finding the time in between is also for me as well. Like while in medical school, I did have to get a very small loan because the interviewing season was not on Zoom. I had to travel for internal medicine interviews. That is, I had to like travel all across the country to interview. Like you have to live in a hotel and then hop on a flight to go to the next place. So having had saved ahead of time, and also so like having had like that borrowed, like knowing that there was something ahead was good. But the recent cycle that I just went through, the fellowship applications was on Zoom. So like I really just needed to buy a camera, and so that was a very welcome change, so to say.
Right, Tari, maybe you could comment on financing residency applications, financing fellowship applications, or even when you applied for jobs as an attending?
So I would say for residency, I think the biggest thing is if you can save some money. And with what Tafazo said, if you have to get a loan to be able to finance that, I think in my own experience, I think it's totally worth it. When you start residence, it gets easier because not easier, but at least you're getting some sort of income from residence, so you can be able to save for the fellowship interviews. And I think for most of you guys, the advantage you have is that you won't need to travel around the country. But for me, when I had to travel, I leveraged again my network. I would go and sleep on someone's couch. Like I remember sleeping in a dorm room. Like it's like you just have to leverage those things, and you try to like organize interviews like on the West Coast around the same time, just so that you save on airfare. And then when you're interviewing for jobs, I think it's slightly easier because they're paying for you to. You're not paying to apply for jobs, and they pay for you to go and see the places and for the interviews. But I think the biggest thing is like finding money for applying for med school and then also for residence. And then after that, it gets slightly easier.
Sorry, one other thing that has come up in the chat, which I think often is an issue for residency, and it's kind of a black box and there's no good solutions to it, is the issue of visas, immigration, etc. Because you have to be careful once you apply for residency. Some programs don't even take internationals who need J1 or H1. So that's another thing to consider on the pathway, because you do med school as an F1, and then you have to apply to residency as an H1 or J1, which again is kind of a can of worms. So one thing someone was asking on the chat was, for those who took gap years, did you guys use your OPT? Did you use other visas? Maybe we could start with, I think Simo and Clarity, both of you took time off. So I don't know, did you guys use OPT? Did you use other visas, or how did you navigate that?
I used OPT with the STEM extension. So that was a total of 3 years.
Okay.
Just quickly to add on to that, I know some people get internships during school year. So I think you have to be careful not to use your OPT during that time and save it for later, because you have a limited amount of OPT time.
Yeah, once you're in residency, again, it's either J1 or H1, and both of those do also have limited time. But one trick that someone told me is the first year of residency, you're eligible for OPT. So you should use your OPT, your intern year. That extends your time. So because H1 is 6 years, J1 is up to 7 years. The J1 is a 2-year requirement to go home. So be careful if you ever sign up for a J1 program. But sometimes you have to do what you have to do. It's 12:18. I don't know. Do people just want to go to 12:30 and then we can wrap it up, or do people want to go and enjoy this nice day? Maybe we can, yeah.
I can answer a question, and I guess like people can leave as they need to. So I took 3 years of between medical college and medical school. I used my OPT and the extension, but my extension, I think, was running out towards the end, and my boss was kind enough to actually fund an H. But like something to know about that is that it then eats up some time from the H that you need later on. Like I'm still able to do. I did 4 years of residency, and I have 2 years of fellowship, and I get to cover all that. And as for doing those summer research programs, because I remember having to deal with that. If you need to go to a different school to do your summer research, don't use the OPT. Ask for your school to approve you for CPT, which is the curriculum practical training. It's like it gives, I think they then give you credit for that. It's like more of like they say it's a required part of your like education, so it does not eat up your. It's a very easy process. My college, that's what they did for me when I went to a different university, so that way you don't use the OPT. So those are my things.
One other question that came up in the chat was, can we talk about MD PhD programs? So MD PhD, what that means is basically there are different versions of it, and George can chime in as needed. So I applied MD PhD and MD only. So you can apply to MD only programs, or you can apply to MD PhD programs. Most, if not all, MD PhD programs are fully funded programs where you do your MD, you do the first 2 years of med school, you do a PhD, then you come back and finish the last 2 years of med school, and you graduate with an MD and a PhD. Some programs are separate, like the one I wanted to do at HMS at Harvard, but I didn't end up doing it, which is you come as an MD student, then you apply for the PhD program, and then you get considered plus or minus for funding for the remaining years. So some schools will allow you to apply to a PhD program once you come. And then the other thing is a caveat is some residencies will allow you to even apply for PhD programs in residency. So for example, Northwell LIJ, where I wanted to do surgical residency, or where I considered it, they had a PhD program. So you can do PhDs after the fact. So that's a good thing to consider, especially if you don't want to worry about the financial aspect, but they are a bit lengthy. They require more in terms of your research profile because they are robust and they really want to know you want to come for the research. So they're a little bit more competitive to get into. I don't know if George can chime in terms of how did you choose MD versus MD PhD, and what did you do to decide and to strengthen your application?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yeah, in terms of the programs, most of I think the programs that are funded by the MSTP, I think it's the Medical Scientist Training Program from the NIH, those tend to be fully funded. There are different iterations of MD PhD programs. So just check on their website and see how much funding they give. For my school, it actually gave full funding for medical school tuition, but not the living expenses. And I was fortunate to get that from my PhD training. My boss just extended my stipend into medical school as well. But the school itself officially only gave the funding through the PhD and the MD, like on the tuition. And then when I was in college, so I was interested in research. And so when I came to college, I just asked around and got connected to a research mentor, and he had some research projects because most MD PhD programs, they really want to see that you have some significant research. And that's above the rest of the requirements that they want from everyone. So definitely showing your research interest was big. So I was fortunate enough to have that early on. The hardest thing coming from Zimbabwe is I'd never done a research project before. I didn't even know what research was. So now I'm applying for these programs and everyone says, hey, like, do you have research experience? So I really appreciate the professor who gave me that chance to say, hey, you don't have research experience, but you need it like from somewhere. And my first research experience wasn't even in medicine. It was like this chemistry project. And then that's what allowed me now to get a more biomedical related project, because now I could say I have some research experience. And then, so my research mentor that I worked with, she's the one who really, really rooted for me and tried to help me as much as possible. So that helped. And then after having the research interest, when I was applying, like I said before, definitely for me, the funding was a big thing. So I applied both MD, PhD and MD. And thankfully, most of the programs that you applied MD, PhD, they also said if they don't accept you to the MD, PhD program, they will automatically consider you for the MD. So for the other programs that had MD, PhD, I just applied MD, PhD. And then, so in the end, I had, I think, 2 choices. One was MD only, and then one was MD, PhD. But for the MD only, then I was wondering, like, okay, how am I going to finance this? In retrospect, I would say, though, I wouldn't just do MD, PhD because of the funding. So it's actually good if you love the research, then it's because it's a long program. So you'd rather get a loan, and because that's what almost everyone does in the US. So, and I know, like, coming from Zimbabwe, I was a little bit scared of like, oh, what's a loan? Like, I don't want to have all this debt. But that's something that you can do because you are going to commit, like for me, I had to commit like 5 years of my life doing the PhD, and that comes at a cost. But for me, it's something that at least I loved the research. I could do the research for free. But definitely you have to have the love for it to carry you.
All right, thank you. So one thing I wanted to highlight, which I think wasn't really highlighted in our discussion, is the fact that med schools really want a well-rounded individual. So, instead of checking off boxes, say research check, shadowing check, this check, do actually enjoy your college experience. So med schools like people that did other things. Like if you play a musical instrument, go and join the school orchestra. If you like leadership, go and become president of the African Students Association. If you like to act, go and join the drama club and do things like that. What they want to see is someone who's going to be a leader, someone who's caring, has empathy, someone who actually is interesting, right? So I would say do not neglect your extracurriculars that you actually do enjoy in lieu of trying to check off boxes to get into med school. Sure, those things are important, like shadowing and research, but at the same time, when people do look at applications, so for Harvard, some of the applications are reviewed by actual med students, second years, and the less interesting you are, the less likely you are going to get an interview. So, hang in there, be interesting, enjoy your college experience, and do what you actually enjoy doing. And ultimately, it will get you to where you need to get because you actually present a unique picture. In the last couple of minutes remaining, I just want to go around from most senior to junior and say, do you guys have any parting words of wisdom? So I'll actually do Tari, Tambu, Tafadzwa, then George, Simo, and Clarity. So parting words of wisdom. Oh, and thank you to all our panelists for taking time out of this beautiful weekend to do this.
I would say don't be afraid to reach out to any of us or any people that just really leverage your network. Because if you don't ask for help, no one will know that you need help. So just reach out to as many people as you can.
All right, Tambu, do you have any words of wisdom?
So I would say, I think we are offering all ourselves to you, and a lot of people offer to help you. Be a willing participant in that process and be a good mentee. Because people, if you reach out and then you don't do the follow-up work that needs to be done, it's not a good thing, and they may not be as willing to help you, or like you screw up the other people behind you. So be a good mentee.
All right.
And I'll just say definitely, as George said, don't forget to enjoy the days that when you're out, when you're in college. Don't forget to listen to the birds chirping, because there are a lot of things can pass you while you're just so focused on getting to this one goal that you have. Again, you have a lot of people that are there to help you, and along the way, just take some time, listen to the birds chirping, you'll be fine.
I think I'll say, since medical school is very rigorous and you're going to be expected to do well a lot, it can be an unrealistic expectation sometimes. So do your best, but don't be afraid of failing. You're going to fail at some point. You don't have to have a perfect application. I actually flunked my MCAT and I was trying to apply to an MD PhD program, but I still had the faith to just say, you know what, I'm still going to apply. I think I have enough, and that worked. So do your best, and that should be enough.
I'll say stay connected to people going through the same process. So I had friends who were taking the MCAT at the same time. We would talk, you get that score that you weren't expecting in your practice test and you're feeling very down, and you can chat about it. So that helps too. And also stay connected to your mentors.
I will say start early and don't doubt yourself. Just do it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I agree with what everyone said. Like, stay connected, don't isolate yourself, leverage your networks. Stay hopeful. When we applied, as I said, everyone told us we weren't make it. It doesn't happen. It cannot be done. But as you have seen, there are a bunch of people that have done it. So, stay helpful, enjoy college, because honestly, someone told me these are the best 4 years of your life, and I thought they were lying, but college was indeed the best 4 years of your life, of my life at least. Well, my wife is looking at me, but like, yeah, that's a different story. But anyway, college is awesome. Enjoy it. But yeah, keep going, work hard. You will get there. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so just steady does it. As I said, there are links in the chat where I'll be posting this video. I think I'll probably put a copy of it on YouTube if people want to search for it, but YouTube has an algorithm where it hides certain videos, so you may not find it if you do that. But there'll be other resources too. So if people have resources to send to me, email me, and I'll link them as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys for hosting.
Enjoy your day. Enjoy your
Thank you
week.
so much.